Session to order. The time is 4:30. It is Tuesday, April 2nd, 2019, and we are in the Joe N. Idelette Junior Teacher Education Center. At this time, I would like to just say good afternoon and thank you for everyone that is in attendance today and watching on television. I would like to remind the individuals here and watching from home, this is a special called board business discussion session. No formal action takes place in these informal discussion sessions. All board action votes must take place during the board business meetings held at 6 p.m. on the second and fourth Tuesday of the month under the action agenda with proper notice to the public. The next business meeting is on Tuesday, April 9th at 6 p.m. The public is invited to give citizen comment during all board business meetings. We typically have never had with this board public input during our board discussions. Tonight's discussion will be limited to the review of the superintendent's search and process and timeline. With that being said, the board received an email last Monday from Dr. Rendell informing us that he is seeking employment outside of our jurisdiction. As we reviewed at the last meeting, in accordance to his contract, he is required to give us a 30-day notice, written notice in advance if he does choose to take a position elsewhere. In response to the superintendent's action, we have a duty as custodians of the school district to set an action timeline in play. We are here tonight to simply be proactive in ensuring that we not only think of one employee, but we also think of what is in the best interest of the 18,000 students entrusted to us, our 2,200 employees, the parents, taxpayers, and the $287 million budget that we are entrusted to oversee. I am encouraged as the chair and as a board member that we are doing the right thing by having this tough conversation tonight. So with that, let's begin. I had asked Mrs. Esplin to give you the backup, and you had the backup in your box.
I don't have my backup currently with me. Normally Mrs. Esplin provides it right now. Could you recess the meeting so I can go and get my folder, please?
Yes.
Thank you. Oh, thank you, Mrs. Poisel. Always prepared like a Girl Scout. Thank you very much.
Okay. So at the last meeting, I had asked if the board would allow me on today to give us a historic perspective of what the board and the timeline in the past looked like for this district. And so I just want to briefly go through three different timelines. So looking back to the fall of 2014, Dr. Adams gave the board a 10-month notice that she was retiring in June of 2015. And that was at the time that we were looking for Dr. Rendell. The board search timeline from the beginning to the end took approximately 10 months. The board contracted with FSBA Executive Director Wayne Blanton to oversee the search process. Unfortunately, Dr. Blanton is now retired, but they have someone that they have currently that does those searches. No interim superintendent was needed because Dr. Adams was a part of the process, which led to the hiring of Dr. Rendell. So we look at 2011. Dr. LaCava finished his contract. Dr. Fran Adams was hired to take his place. No outside interim was needed at that time. And then we go on to 2008. Dr. LaCava was hired to replace Dr. Tom Marr. Tom Marr was terminated by the board 18 months prior. The board hired an outside interim superintendent, Dr. Pat Pritchett, for 18 months to stabilize the district and assist the board through the search process. The board at that time also utilized the expertise of FSBA for the superintendent search team to conduct the search. So historically, the board has utilized FSBA to conduct the search process from beginning to end. So right now, what I'd like to do, I'd like to go through, briefly go through some of the steps and the timeline that the FSBA has provided me, and it's in your backup.
Mrs. Zork, I'd like to make a comment if I could, please. We currently have an acting superintendent. He has not given notice. He has not been given notice. He has not resigned. He has not been terminated. I feel that the entire conversation about a timeline for a superintendent search is premature. We've never had a conversation about whether or not to allow the superintendent's contract to go through 2020.
Okay, but the board did ask for this meeting today to review a superintendent timeline, so that's what I've prepared for today.
Mrs. Zork, if I may, I don't believe that the board asked to have a meeting regarding the superintendent timeline. I believe that you have taken some steps over the past week, some unilateral action that makes me very concerned as a board member, that I don't believe have been representative of the entire board. We have not taken any legal action or legal vote to move in this direction. We have not discussed working with a consultant. We have not discussed which consultant to work with. We have not authorized you to contact FSBA or FADS or Dr. Bill Vogel, who I know you were in conversation with regarding perhaps a possible presentation regarding a superintendent search, as well as interviewing or speaking with Dr. Pat Pritchett as of this past Friday, and then taking him on a tour of the district office and introducing him to staff, which, in my opinion, was truly in an effort to undermine the superintendent and to intimidate his staff. Again, I believe you've taken some unilateral action that is not representative of board corporate or any direction board corporate has given you, and I am extremely concerned as to how those types of actions may be hazardous to the board going forward legally.
So board members, I would like to clarify here. During our last meeting, I had asked if we could have a discussion on the historic perspective of what the timeline looked like and how the board went about the process. So in doing my research, what I come across is the board did utilize FSBA, and in learning about that, I had called to just understand the process that we had used in the past. In addition, in the past, we did utilize Dr. Pritchett, so I did contact him to understand how do we go about the process when he was in the interim, and what processes did we take during that time. And I learned at that time that they also used FSBA. So I had not overreached my bounds as chairman, because I was tasked with doing research on this. And at this time, I would like to continue, and if you would indulge me for approximately 15 minutes, and then we can open up the conversation.
I have one more comment I'd like to make, please. Thank you very much. I'm not an attorney, but I do have concerns about the potential legal impacts of Mrs. Zork's actions. I'm also concerned that the discussion at our last business meeting may also be legally problematic. We, in fact, do have a contract with Dr. Rendell. As I understand it, he does have a property right to the terms of his contract. If actions by a board member result in interference with Dr. Rendell's ability to perform his contractual obligations, I'm concerned that the board would potentially be exposed to liability for damages. I think it's very important that we as a board going forward speak about the authority of the position of chair, and I have put it on for a discussion session on April 9th to speak about board governance and once again operating protocol. I say this because I do believe that Mrs. Zork has taken unilateral action, has not considered all board members' positions going forward. And I caution the board as we continue in conversation about this very concerning issue, that we are mindful of the position that we are putting the district and our students and our families in.
Can I proceed, please? Thank you. So I would like you to look at the backup information I have provided you, because I want to look at historically if we utilize the expertise of FSBA, I had looked at the steps of the superintendent search process. So I'm not going to go into all the details, but I think it is important to dive into the timeline provided by the FSBA. So in your packets, board members, you'll see, if you'll look up here, you'll see the agenda, and then the second page is superintendent search process. And then page 2 of, let's see, we're going to look at the timeline, which is page 3 of 3, which looks like this, okay? So, as I was given permission to look at the timeline and help us understand what that looks like, I would like us to briefly take a look at this, okay? So, according to FSBA, the first step, there's 9 steps, but the first step is the board discusses process, timeline, transition, qualifications, and methods of advertisement. That step could take up to 4 weeks. The second step, board meets to finalize decisions on above, engage community and advisory committee involvement, if any, finalize promotional materials and language, and location of advertisements. That FSBA, if you look, it takes between it takes about 9 weeks is what they have there. Third step, job posting and application submitted. That could take 9 weeks depending on how rushed we were to have to do that. The fourth step, search firm review of application references. That could take, it's showing up to 8 weeks. It doesn't have to take that long. Fifth step, community advisory review of applications, if we desire to go that way. School board narrows pool of candidates and selects interviewees. So that's the 7th step, and that could take, as you look here, that could be time, that could take a lot of time. That could take up to 10 weeks. And the 8th step, conduct site visits, interviews, and community tours and community interviews. 9th step, board makes final decision and negotiates the contract. That could take anywhere between, it could take a week, it could take 10 weeks, up to 10 weeks is what they have here on the timeline. And then finally, the start of the new superintendent, depending on the notice required to give his or her current employer. So they're saying up to 7 weeks on that. So if we'll look on page 2 of 3 of discussion 1, I just want to highlight down at the bottom what the FSBA best practices that they have is a minimum of 6 months should be allocated for a full search. Abbreviated searches can be conducted depending on the need of the district. I'd like us to look at the 4th bullet. FSBA has recently expanded their superintendent search process protocol and now provides an all-inclusive support system to the boards. This process involves board superintendent search prep, actual superintendent search process, new hire on board or onboarding, leadership transition, and the first year support as requested. So it just depending if what the board would want. All searches are conducted with the guidelines of Florida Sunshine Law. So that is the first thing that I wanted to review. That's a brief overview. So what FSBA is saying is it's definitely would be a 6-month process if that's something that we were to choose to have to look at. So next, what I would like to do is also look at the FSBA Superintendent Search proposal presented to the Hernando County School Board on 7/24/2018. So when I was researching to get a better idea of what does the FSBA, I I was given the link to Hernando County because they presented to them back in 2018, and it was actually televised, and I had asked Mrs. Esplin if she would share that information with the board ahead of time, and it was about a 20-minute presentation that they had given to that board at the time. So the Florida School Board Association Superintendent Search Services Hernando County School Board proposal is a part of your backup if you would like to take a look at that. So if you'll look on page 1, this is discussion item 3. I'm not suggesting that we use FSBA, but I am just presenting the facts that this is who we used before in the past. Historically, we've used them for 2 of the last 3 searches. So let's take a look real quickly at what the FSBA offers in their proposal and what they do. The FSBA Superintendent Search, oh, I'm sorry, 1 of 13, and then on the back of it. So, Superintendent Search Expertise. I just want to highlight that since 2006, the FSBA Superintendent Search Team listed below has facilitated superintendent searches for Osceola County, Sarasota, St. John's, Alachua, Flagler, and Brevard County school boards. And they have provided those references in the back of this information, and I would encourage anyone that is interested in learning more about the process, they could directly reach out to these chairpersons that's listed in the back. So I want to go on to page 3 of 13. In the proposal, they went through why select Florida School Board Association for the search. They also went through a superintendent search team. The key members of the search team is former school board and 3-term Florida School Board Association Executive Director Andrea Messina is part of that search team. In addition, Dr. Bill Vogel. So you did hear Mrs. Justice mention Mr. Bill Vogel. Well, he is the one that actually has replaced Dr. Wayne Blanton. So that's why Dr. Wayne Blanton had suggested I reach out to Dr. Bill Vogel, and fortunately, we had already met Dr. Bill Vogel when he was here giving us our finance training. So Dr. Bill Vogel is also a part of the search team, in addition to John Reichert. John is a Executive Director of Human Resources professional, and so he is a part of the FSBA team. And in addition, the superintendent search team, they listed in their proposal any references if you would like to reach out and just ask them about the search process. That is on the back page 7 of 13. And of course, we've already went through the timeline and the process. For their expertise and the leadership in the search of a superintendent, if the board was interested in utilizing them, I'd prefer that they come in and they talk about their presentation in person and answer any questions that the board has. By having them come in, that would not bind us to being committed to them. There are several search firms out there. I just had found this one because this is the one that we had used historically, and it seems to be the one that a lot of the school districts are utilizing. I wasn't familiar with the names of any of the others. So I have reached out to the FSBA to ask them about the search process and the timeline. And instead of me trying to fill in the blanks for them, they did say that they would be available to come either next Tuesday, April 9th in the morning, or they could come Tuesday, April 16th at 4:30 to 6:30 if the board wishes for them to come and just talk to us about the processes and just answer any questions that the board has. Just one moment.
I just had a question, if you could repeat that. I'm sorry, I missed. Could you just, who said they would come and when did they say they would come?
I have reached out to the FSBA and Andrea Messina, and they had said that they would be available next Tuesday, April 9th in the morning, or they could come Tuesday, April 16th, 4:30 to 6:30 at our next available time, to provide the board with similar presentations and options and timeline that they had provided with Hernando County, to give us the opportunity to ask any questions from the experts on the superintendent search process, or as a board, if you have any other questions not related to the superintendent search, that out of courtesy, they would come and sit with us and meet with us at no charge, just so we know they would come here and talk to us. In addition, Dr. Pat Pritchard is here in the audience with us. Dr. Pritchard was the interim superintendent from 2017-18. He's here and he's available if any board members would like to have him come up and have any questions for him about smooth transitions, the process while he was here, and give advice on expertise and when he was here, and he did go out and it was a part of utilizing the FSBA in that search process. So, with that, that is what I have to present tonight, and I would like to open this up for discussion. And I would like to go around, and then we can circle back around so that we can give everyone fair time to speak. Mrs. Rosario or Mrs. Justice, Mrs. Berenborg, who would like to speak first?
You were ready, go ahead. I just wanted to respond to something that Mrs. Justice mentioned, that you were unilaterally working to this end and that you unilaterally called this meeting when in fact you had consensus from board members at the last board meeting. So you are not unilaterally working to this end. You presented it to us, and through consensus is the way that the board works, and that's how we are here. I also would like to reiterate a question that I presented to Mrs. Diagresta, our counsel, our legal counsel. One of the questions that I asked at our last board meeting was, if we were to begin the vetting process, would we be violating the superintendent's contract? And the answer was no. We are not violating his contract, so I do not believe that we would be in any legal, that we would have any legal ramifications as a result of this vetting process. I'm sure Mrs. Diagresta could kind of chime in or correct us. I don't believe that Mrs. Diagresta, being our legal counsel, will allow us to meet or would allow us to pursue in this manner to discuss this if we were violating any legal grounds or, pursuing or, going in the direction that would cause us to have some legal issues later on. I want to trust that she would advise us rightly, because that's exactly what she's here for. I also wanted to kind of remind us that we're not here to, if I understand the request to be here, it wasn't to ask the superintendent today, it wasn't to ask him to step down, it wasn't to ask him to resign, it wasn't to fire him or anything like that. We were only meeting, we agreed to only meet to discuss what it would look like to begin the vetting process for a new superintendent in the event that he should give notice, we would only have the 30-day window, and so getting a head start on that process is something that we agreed to meet for that purpose. Lastly, I'd like to kind of just throw it out there for anyone, any principal, any assistant principal, any superintendent, any assistant superintendent. If you are told, let's go to the principal. If a principal is told that their 5th grade teacher is looking to interview elsewhere, your first thought is, oh my gosh, I have to replace my 5th grade teacher. If an assistant superintendent is told that one of their principals is giving notice that they're just interviewing elsewhere, the first thought for any superintendent is assistant superintendent is they're gonna think, I have to replace my principal. Eventually, I may have to replace that person. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen, but it is naturally and organically going to be a concern for that administrator who is going to take this position in the event that this person were to leave. The same would be true for any business owner, worker, anybody who is a supervisor would take that. So I actually think that having this discussion or not having this discussion would put us at I mentioned this at our board meeting, would put us at a very disadvantage and certainly put us back. If May comes around and if in fact the superintendent were to accept a position, we would have a head start essentially on the process. And I think that's what we're here for. So to put the district first in that manner is something that I agreed to through my consensus. I didn't agree to anything else. So I agreed to just that, and that's what I'm here for. In this process, we are not tying the superintendent's hands for anything else. He's still working, he's still the superintendent, he's still taking care of the day-to-day ins and outs of our school district, and that's really the way that it should be. This also should not have anything to do with talking badly about our schools. I want to leave our schools out of this. I don't think that our schools and our children should be affected. I have heard from the media some indirects regarding some schools and some principals, and I think that that's inappropriate. Right now, the discussion isn't about that. Right now, the discussion is only about, the vetting process. So I'd like to keep it to that.
Just before we go to Dr. Schiff, one of my final questions to the board is, are you interested in having the FSBA come in and present what they have done in the past in helping us through the search?
Maybe, if I can answer that closer to the end of our discussion. Mm-hmm. I have reservations about the legislative platform of the FSBA. I like some of the things that they do, mm-hmm. But there are some things that I have concerns with, and primarily it's the concern about school choice. Okay. But if I can answer that closer to the end of our meeting, I would like to reserve that opportunity.
Okay. Dr. Schiff?
Well, I've written and rewritten these notes about 16 times since last Tuesday, and now I'm not going to use any of them.
Oh, no.
I have a number of concerns. And although I have them all neatly organized here, I'm going to speak more from where we are in this moment, not what's on this paper. I would like to hear from Ms. DeGresta about Mrs. Justice's concern about legal implications, and so we'll come back to that if we can. having this conversation is an important conversation. It's probably the most important conversation that we will have as a board. I am concerned about the ways in which this conversation has occurred. I'm concerned about the ways in which we received information from the superintendent. I'm concerned about the ways in which we had a conversation last Tuesday at which I was not prepared in that moment to have more conversation moving forward in the heat of tension and drama and conflict. And I will stand by that is never the best way to have such an important conversation. And so there have been a lot of interpretations about what that meant or didn't mean. And I will never have a conversation of this magnitude when tensions and drama are that high. So for the record. That said, to have this conversation is either timely or extremely premature. And we haven't had that conversation yet. So to have this conversation, when there are a number of things sort of floating around unsaid, leaves some ambiguity. And so we are either having a conversation way, way in advance of the termination of the superintendent's contract, which is now 15 months away, understanding that it will take us potentially 6 to 8 to 10 months to search for a superintendent, and if it is the intention not to renew that contract, then it is appropriate at some point prior to the termination of that contract to have this conversation. I'm not clear that we're there. I am clear, however, that we are now in the midst of a conversation, and irrespective of my feelings about how that conversation got started, here we are. So to have that conversation, and to have a conversation about timeline, seems to necessitate a conversation, not in this moment, but moving forward, about what our intentions are as a board, what our intentions are with the superintendent. And I am concerned, and I feel strongly that we as a board need to operate collectively. We need to operate far better than we did last Tuesday. I am concerned about the ways in which we are being watched, both locally, statewide, and hopefully not larger than that. But I'm clear that many people were aware of that conversation last Tuesday. I am clear that it demonstrated disarray. It demonstrated a lack of consensus among the school board because we were not prepared to have that conversation. I am completely open to having that conversation. I've done a lot of thinking about it since last Tuesday. I have clear thoughts about it, but this is not the time to have that conversation. It is important, however, that we have that conversation. And in order to do that, I want to be clear that that conversation is significantly the most important conversation we may have as a board. We need to have it carefully, we need to have it thoughtfully, and we need to allow enough time for that conversation. While I had not thought of it prior to this moment, I would welcome a conversation about that in our next board discussion on the 9th. I think we have a number of other agenda items, but I'm pretty clear that this one's the most important, and I'm willing to second pretty much any other agenda item we might have to have this conversation next Tuesday. I'm not ready to have FSBA come in prior to having that conversation, because if we're going to have a conversation about a superintendent search moving forward, it's premature to have that conversation when we have no idea what that timeline is. So we need to have that conversation first. Second, if we decide to have that conversation sooner rather than later, we need to be clear about that. But at the moment, no superintendent is going to be interested in coming to this district for a timeline that's ambiguous, that might be 15 months from now and might be sooner than that. Moreover, I'm not clear how that's going to affect our CFO search. I'm not sure how that affects how somebody wants to come into this district with this board, with this level, frankly, of drama right now. And my concern is that we demonstrate to our constituents, to our citizens, to the media, to everybody, that we are in better control of that conversation. So I want to have that conversation, and I want to have it carefully before engaging in a conversation about a timeline. And before engaging, because I think you're right, Mrs. Zork, this is an incredibly important conversation, and understanding the timeline really matters. because it's not a discussion that happens, it's not something that gets resolved in 30 days. And if we are in the position of having to make a decision in 30 days, I would rather be prepared than unprepared. So I don't disagree with having the conversation, but I think there's conversations we need to have first, and we need to have carefully, and we need to demonstrate that we are a board that can have those conversations in a reasonable way and that we can work together moving forward. That's all I'm going to say for now. I have a lot more to say, but I'm going to leave it at that for now, and then we'll come back for discussion.
So clarity,
Yes.
conversation next board meeting on,
On what are we doing, frankly? Because if we are considering terminating the superintendent's contract before June of 2020, then we need to have that conversation. If we are not considering that, then that's a different conversation. But we need to have that conversation first. It needs to be noticed. We need to have it in whatever way we're going to have it. I'm not saying we shouldn't have it, and I'm not saying that I don't have thoughts about it one way or another. But that's not what this meeting was noticed for, so we can't have that here. But we need to have that conversation really, really clearly, and we need to allow enough time for it.
so just to
And
clarify.
that is not
Okay.
anything that was on.
Right.
Not-
So just to clarify, on Tuesday. it should-
Tuesday the 9th, we have a board
no,
discussion.
This past Tuesday, it was
Yeah.
your understanding that we were going to have a conversation about timelines and processes today.
To be completely honest, in that conversation, I was not clear which conversation we were going to have today, to be honest. I was taken aback by the conversation we had, the level, the way in which it escalated, and I have stated and will continue to state, I'm never going to make decisions of this magnitude in that kind of an environment. So at that moment, I was pretty taken aback by the conversation we were having, the challenges we were having in that conversation, and we can have conflict, it's fine. But we need to have ways of dealing with conflict in healthy ways, and that was not happening last Tuesday. So I'm happy to have conflict. I'm happy to have the discussion. I think it's a healthy thing to do, but not that way in that moment. So I'm suggesting that if we're going to have that conversation, we have it. We have it. You know, let's just put it on the table and let's just have it. It's the elephant in the room. Let's address it, but let's address it in a meeting that is for that purpose.
Okay.
And until we have that conversation, I can't make a decision. I do not have the concerns that Mrs. Rosario has about FSBA and their legislative platform. I have had only positive interactions with anybody at FSBA. I don't share that concern at all. But I'm not ready to have a conversation about how we move forward until I can give FSBA or anybody else some direction about when that process starts, when we're looking to end it, how we're looking to have it, and then we can have that. And then it's appropriate to bring them in. But I'm not sure. We may be there in this moment, but this is not the meeting that was noticed for that conversation, and we need to have that conversation. So that's, and there's more, but I want to hear from my fellow board members and then come back.
Okay.
I have a couple questions before
Okay.
I talk.
Oh. Sorry, and I forgot to come back to Ms. DeGresta about the legal issues, but we can come around to that.
You want to do it now?
Yes, please.
The topics that you're discussing right now are appropriate for this board meeting, and I am not hearing anything that makes me want to interrupt a conversation. And I want to submit to you or to any board member that if I hear something that could lead to a later legal issue, I will be the first one to jump into the conversation and ask for a moment.
So can I clarify that thus far, you are not aware that we are in any legal jeopardy?
Not by what I've heard right now. My crystal ball isn't working for the rest of the day yet. So I want to reserve the ability to say, excuse me, may we have a moment?
Thank you for clearing that up.
Thank you.
Okay, so first question. Well, I know that we're one of the only two counties that are not FSBA members, correct? Only two. So if we're not members, then we would have to pay a fee then to have them come in and do that, correct?
for the superintendent search.
Correct.
If we were a member, or even a non-member, there's still a fee for that search. We paid a fee back in 2014 as a member.
So it's a bigger fee than as a non-member.
They said that they would work with us if that's something that we would be looking toward. But I do have the numbers here, of what it would cost if we wanted to become members, prorating it starting on April 1st, 2019. I have those numbers.
Can we hold off for
Yeah.
that? Okay. So that was my next question, was cost, but we'll get at that. Then will they do a search with the sitting superintendent?
Are you,
I'm asking
Okay.
you, will they do that? Did you ask them?
I basically just wanted to know what their process and timeline was. Those are type of questions that we would have to ask them when they come here, and how they typically go along like that.
Okay, because I know this is a very rare thing to have ask for a search when you have a sitting superintendent that has not resigned. So I was just curious whether or not they would even do a search. I'm not sure if that would happen. But I did prepare a statement. I am going to read my statement because I did I spent this past week reflecting on last week's events, and I attended some school and school-related functions where I was approached by staff members, teachers, and concerned citizens, and everyone had differing opinions. It was very clear that this situation has caused turmoil in our schools and has caused some division in our community. I read the numerous articles and social media posts and can really understand why people are conflicted. Even students are posting their views. There is a lot of information and misinformation floating around. My greatest concern is for our students, our teachers, and our staff members. Some approached me with extremely strong opinions, and some told me that they were afraid to speak, either in support or not in support, because they were nervous of what others on their campus might think of them. Testing started today and will be continuing until mid-May. Our schools should be focusing on exhibiting what they've learned this year and as they work so hard to improve. I don't want us, the board, to be the cause of such controversy at this critical time and take away the focus from their efforts. A few comments that I have read and heard have suggested that board members may have violated sunshine laws. This concerns me greatly as I'm a part of this board, and I want to be proud of being a member of a group of professionals that are respected in our community. We all had ethics training. We all had a review of the sunshine laws, and I trust that my fellow board members are following what we learned in Tampa. With that being said, I was unclear about the accusation about speaking to reporters to act as a liaison, so I called our attorney. She told me that she thought board members were okay in speaking to reporters, but encouraged me to call the State Commission on Ethics. I called them, and I have in the past, as recently as when I decided to run for board. I wanted to be proactive and ask them about any conflicts I would have as an educator and an author in another district before running. I found their office to be very helpful and objective. I found the same this week in my call to them. After discussing the article and suggestions by others, they referred me to the Florida State Attorney General's office. Before this call, I went to their website and found a precedent case. The specific section of the Sunshine Law in question is Section 7C, the use of non-board members or staff to act as liaisons. The precedent case was about school board members that have conversations with the press. I asked the office and also found them to be extremely kind and helpful. The attorney I spoke to affirmed me that what I thought was correct. Any allegations that I have read about do not apply here. Therefore, in our opinion, in their opinion and in my opinion, no school board members have done anything wrong by talking to the press. All of the attorneys did, however, say that board members should be very cautious when speaking to the press, especially on voting issues. And I wanted to be clear and clear that up for the public. As far as evaluating the superintendent, I have been gathering facts and data about the different goals that we must judge him on. Because many of those goals are based on performance data, I still need this year's data to objectively evaluate him. That data won't be available until June. July is when evaluations are set because not only is data available then, but the fiscal year is closed and schools are mostly closed. So if we did decide to seek another superintendent, we wouldn't be disrupting campuses as much. Indeed, to move up his evaluation simply because he had retained counsel for the negotiation of his contract, in my opinion, would be short-sighted on the part of this board. I'm also concerned that the actions of this board may very much work against us. Any qualified candidate will do their homework and will watch our board meetings. I want them to be confident that they can trust us to be fair and consistent in our decisions and actions. If we remove the superintendent now, without cause, who will run the district while we are in the midst of testing and wrapping up the year? That would be very difficult for an interim superintendent. If Dr. Rendell finds employment and gives us 30 days, he would still be responsible for getting us through most of the testing season. An interim superintendent can come in and work this summer if needed. I, for one, would like to settle things down for the sake of our students and our schools. Take our time, do our homework. We owe our schools, our employees, and our superintendent that. Therefore, we need to make the decision on schedule, which would be in July.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Berenberg, for doing your research and clearing that up.
Sure.
Thank you. Mrs. Justice?
Thank you very much, Mrs. Zork. I believe it's in paramount importance for the board to discuss and reach a clear understanding of the authority of each board member, including the board chair, as an individual member and as compared to a member of the collective board acting at an official notice meeting. Absent an official policy change, that understanding must be grounded in the adopted board bylaws and policies, which must be consistent with current law. If we are going to proceed to engage a firm to conduct a superintendent search, we also must take action to create the vacancy for which we would be searching. If Dr. Rendell secures different employment, he has contractual obligations relative to providing notice, and we have no reason to believe he will not honor those obligations. The board would then have a range of options to provide continuous executive leadership for the district going forward. I'd like to second what Mrs. Berenberg said regarding testing starting today in our schools. I'd like to apologize because I feel that this has caused a lot of disruption amongst our schools and for our teachers and our staff. And I apologize for that. I hope that everyone had a good day today, that students felt positive and happy and successful. And truly, in all of the conversations that we seem to have, the students seem to be left out of those conversations, what is best for our students and our staff.
Okay. Is that it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Mrs. Rosario?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. May I pose a question to Dr. Schiff?
Yes.
Dr. Schiff, in your comments, you said that you would prefer to have a subsequent discussion, but I was a little unclear on the purpose of that discussion.
Sure.
Please.
If we're having a conversation about a search and a timeline, that presupposes that we either are going to make a decision or have made a decision about when that timeline might start. If we have not made that decision, we need to acknowledge that this is a fairly abstract conversation, that we happen to be having in a fairly abstract way. At some point in the future, we might want to have to search for a superintendent, and we should just know what that looks like. Mm-hmm. If we are having a more concrete conversation, presuming that we are going to be engaging in this in some finite time frame, we need to get clear about that too. Mm-hmm. So if we're having a nice abstract conversation about, yeah, sometime we might search for a superintendent, okay, then that's what we're having. But if that's not what we're having, let's call it for what it is. Let's call it for what it is. Let's address kind of, whatever the metaphor is, the monkey in the room or the elephant on the table. And let's have that conversation. Let's not avoid it. Let's be straight about it. Let's be direct with one another about it. And then let's move forward. I echo Mrs. Berenberg's concerns about testing. That said, my conversations with people in schools have not led me to believe that it's affecting testing or it's affecting students in that way. Others may have had different conversations, My experience in the district and at schools is that business is getting done. Business is going on as business needs to get done, and the business of the district continues to happen irrespective of our conversations. They do what they have to do. That is our pride and our privilege of the people who serve in this district, and I trust their integrity and I trust their professionalism in that. So I am less concerned about that at the moment, because I think business will get done. And I have not heard anything suggesting it doesn't. Again, anybody at the table may have heard something different. I have not. Whether or not we want to have this conversation as soon as next week or after, in light of what happens between now and the end of term, then we should discuss that too, as Mrs. Berenberg raised. Whether or not we should have that conversation immediately, because here it is sitting in the space, and whether we like it or not, we're in it. So either we have that conversation now, or we say, it's testing, let's get back to what needs to be done to finish out the academic year, and then let's have that conversation. I haven't made I haven't,
So
Yeah, but-
we're going to go around. So she had a question. She asked
She
Dr.
answered, but I just
So,
wanted to
go
finish
ahead.
my thought, if that's okay. Thank you for that, because I just wasn't sure exactly what you were referring to. I went into a school today, and though teachers and staff are concerned about this topic of conversation, Dr. Schiff is right, work is going on. It is not affecting the children in that sense. So I think that we can rest assured that, this conversation is not going to impede their work. I will say that as we were going around, I'm glad that I kind of reserved some of my comments for after, because my initial thought when I said that I wasn't sure about the FSBA, I think I was thinking along the lines of becoming a member. I'm not sure if I want to make that move right now. I'm not sure if I want us to go in that direction. But in hindsight, as I'm thinking about it, having them come and talk with us wouldn't hurt, because they're coming for free. Is that right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of the questions that we have, they could very well answer. So if we were to meet about this on our own, we would sort of be going around in this hamster wheel, because we have 3 new board members and not, anyone who would have some of the answers to the questions here for us. Mm-hmm. So having them come in would be that, the voice of reason, sort of say, in this process. So to that end, I would welcome them coming in. I would welcome them meeting with us, since they are going to do it for free. It's not going to hurt us. In fact, it might actually answer some of the questions that you indeed have about that, what it would look like going forward. Something else that I wanted to point out, which is a personal reflection, is that I don't think that searching for the CFO or any other position might be a hindrance in this. I actually think that some people might look at us as a board that is working hard to do the right thing for the school district. Again, I go back to the same admin 101. If someone on your team gives you notice that they are actively interviewing or seeking a position outside of the jurisdiction, you would act on that naturally. You would act on what that would look like and when you would worry about when that's going to happen, and will you need to replace that person, just out of, again, it's admin 101. Okay, and the last thing that I wanted to mention regarding this is, if we looked at the timeline, even if we were to wait until the superintendent's contracted date for renewal or non-renewal or whatever that would be, which is in July, and have that conversation after the data comes in, that would only bring us to possibly the second step in this entire timeline. That doesn't hurt us, in fact. The first step is board discusses, processes, timeline, transition, qualification, methods. That'll take about 4 weeks right there. And then the next step is board meets to finalize decisions on the above engaged community and advisory committee involvement, finalize promotional materials, and language and location of advertisements. That actually brings us to the date in which we would regularly discuss, his renewal or non-renewal. So to get only 2 steps into the process, we would already be at the end of the year. Everybody's done. We're only just discussing in those first 2 steps. We're not doing anything. There is no posting of a job. There is no seeking a new superintendent. There's none of that is happening at this point. So we wouldn't then begin to post the job, it seems, until after July or whenever that would be thereafter, that process. So starting it now, again, I think might, it will give us a heads up in that process. Rather than starting it in July from step 1. We already get those discussions underway. We already have the FSBA, come in and answer all of the questions that we need, because how are we going to move forward if we don't have professionals who have already done this, walk us through that process? So I wanted to point that out because I noticed that as I was listening around. Some people, I think it was Dr. Schiff who was mentioning that we might actually, it was Mrs. Barenborg, that we already have a sitting superintendent. So that might actually be something to consider, that we wouldn't be posting anything before, his renewal of the contract. So I think bringing them in, Madam Chair, I would welcome their expertise, their guidance, and their support in understanding that as a new board, we may be faced with some very difficult decisions, and I certainly would want to make those decisions with as much information as possible. So I'm done with that.
Thank you.
I'm going to pass for now.
Okay. Mrs. Barenborg?
Yeah, you mentioned that, I think the comment was something about as a principal and you had a teacher leaving that, can you repeat what you said?
I said, if you're a principal and you have a 5th grade teacher who tells you that they are looking to interview elsewhere, or that they possibly may be leaving, your first inclination is to begin to wonder, if this person leaves, I need to replace that teacher.
So I've been in that position.
Yeah, I
so
know.
I can tell you how I thought. Yeah, you do. You worry about that. But there are rules you have to follow.
Yep.
And the rule you cannot follow, or you cannot do, is go seek other people. They're sitting in that position. You cannot go start recruiting a teacher while you've got a teacher in that position, okay? Because then talk about getting in trouble, we would get in trouble. So we don't do that. As a principal, I've never, yes, I want people, and yes, I might put the feeler out there, that there might be something, but if I go and say, especially if somebody says that to me in confidence in a one-on-one conversation, that I've applied for something, it's not my job to go out there and start recruiting and trying to find somebody, because I can get in trouble for doing that. And so we have to be very, very cautious the way we do this. And you're assuming he's going to get the job.
No, I'm not. I didn't say that.
Okay. Well, when you're saying you
I
want to
didn't say
start
that.
this process and start doing it now, what you're assuming is that he's going to leave. It's either going to be one way or the other. He's either going to leave because he gets a position, or he's going to leave because we do something about that. And like I said, if we do something about that now, which is what you really should be doing, I think we're putting the cart before the horse. If we do something about that now, we're going to disrupt everybody. And you may think that everything goes on like clockwork, and the teachers are still teaching and the kids are still taking tests. But let me tell you, even on the campus I was on today, there was talk about it. And that talk among people on that campus is not healthy for the campus to go on about their business, because people feel very strongly one way or the other. And it's very divided. It is. And people have very strong opinions. I get that, and I'm listening. But I also think we have to be very cautious about how we handle things. And we can't just go off of, I had this happened, or I heard about this, or this is a comment. You know, we have to collect data. We have to be very careful. And I think we can't put the cart in front of the horse. We have to do things in the right manner, in the right way. And as a principal, when I had a teacher that would say to me, I'm going to leave next year for XYZ reason, I knew I had to wait until the opening was there, until I could proceed. And, you know, this is something we should not jump at. We should not jump at, because we want to make sure that we have the right person in place. And if they're going to do their homework, they're going to watch us. They're watching us. And we have to act as a professional group of women that are doing the right thing for everybody. And I want to do the right thing for everybody. I do. And I think that I just want to make sure that we're doing it in the right order and the right way. And take a deep breath and sit back and look at everything. I don't want to rush anything.
Which is exactly why we should have conversation. But may I ask oh, I'm sorry, I apologize.
Write your question down and we'll ask.
Mrs. Rourke, may I speak now?
Yes, you can.
Thank you very much. Dr. Pat Pritchett is in the audience today. He served as an interim superintendent here in Indian River County Schools. Welcome, sir. I've heard wonderful things about you and the work that you did in our schools from many people. So thank you for your service to this organization. I appreciate it. I have 4 children in our public school system. Stability is very important. Much to the analogy that my board members have shared, if you had a 5th grade teacher and she had shared that she may possibly be considering seeking other employment, and you had a previous teacher that had worked at your school that was now available, if you took them on a tour of your school and you brought them into classrooms and you said this person had worked here previously and they're they've been written about in the paper and all of these things, what kind of a message does that send to staff members in this building? It could be seen as innocent. You could say it was innocent. But I do not believe that the intention was pure. I find it to be concerning, and I do believe that any superintendent who will come here after Dr. Rendell leaves, if he chooses to, or this board chooses to terminate him in some way, deserves to be respected. This is bigger than Dr. Mark Rendell. This is about protocol, this is about following policy, and this is about being respectful of individuals and following our board policy. There is procedure in place as to how to operate. I will be clear and say that Dr. Bill Vogel or the FSBA, they absolutely want superintendents to be respected. And they absolutely want to ensure that things are done in a professional manner. And it is my understanding that what happened on Tuesday night, it is my belief that what happened was not professional, that we are putting the cart in front of the horse. I do welcome Mrs. Schiff's suggestion of having a broader conversation, a bigger conversation about how to move forward. But to feel as a board member that you are somehow being kidnapped or put into a position that you haven't agreed to and that we are moving forward in some way is concerning to me.
Okay. I've let each board member speak twice, so I'd like to speak at this moment. I feel like we are having a good conversation. I felt we were having a good conversation the other night because we have to operate in the open. We were given the information on Monday prior to our Tuesday board meeting that Dr. Rendell had sent an email to the board that he is seeking employment outside the school district jurisdiction. The reason that we're even talking about this is because Dr. Rendell has given us that notification. We are talking about that because in his contract, it says that if he does obtain a position, that we have from him a 30-day written notice. And because we have vacancies in this building, and because we are short-staffed on administrators, it would be devastating to have Dr. Rendell leave within 30 days and not already have some type of discussion about this. What does a timeline look like? What are the processes that we have to look at in the event that he does leave within that 30 days? And I felt like it was a very timely conversation on Tuesday, and unfortunately, because we can't talk about this outside of being up here, if I waited 2 weeks to talk about this as board chair, then there would have already been all these speculations, and the conversation would have had already started in the community. It's our job, even when the conversation's tough, it's our job to bring that information to the public. And as chairperson, it was my job to bring this up. I do want, fortunately, I do have my script from which I spoke from last Tuesday. So I just want to clarify something. So on the second page of my script, I had asked the board, I said, I would like to call for a special discussion session set for April 2nd, 4 to 5:30 to review a timeline and review research on how the board in the past have historically went about the superintendent search. So in doing so, I went back, I reviewed the timelines through going back on our website, which you can go back to 2011, and prior to, if you want to go back any later than that, it's not on there, so you have to really start digging. And so fortunately, Dr. Pritchett is here in the community, and he was able to come and meet with me on Friday, and he was just able to review what the board did in the past and how he was utilized. And it was very comforting to know that even though that was not a pleasant time at that back then when that superintendent was terminated, that someone like Dr. Pritchett was available to step in. And I want to make it clear, Dr. Pritchett is not looking for a job. When I did call him, he was actually out on the golf course. He is not looking for a job. He just come in to give me some perspective on how the board had went about during the 2007-08 time frame. And Dr. Pritchett was actually the superintendent at the time that had, with the board, had purchased this property. So he had never been in this building. And it was just seeing it from beginning to end, to actually see the building whenever he said it was just a cow pasture when he was superintendent. So it was very, I did show him just on the bottom floor how the building was laid out, but so I think something's trying to be made of that that's not there, so I just wanted to clarify that. So going back to, we're really getting off topic because I feel like there's a lot of accusations made against me for bringing this up. I've clarified that I didn't act unilaterally, that when I read my script that I had asked for a meeting about the timeline and to bring back historical perspective of what the superintendent search was. So I think I've showed that. Hindering or causing for legal action, I think Mrs. D'Agresta has cleared that up. Violating the law, I think, again, we have tension here, but I don't like the fact that we're speculating and we're making these accusations that don't really need to be made right now, because there's no need in that. We need to stay focused, and we need to stay on task of what this is really about. And I don't find it's in a good the way it's being presented isn't in a good spirit of trying to work together as a board, because there's just no validity to what's being said. Now, going back to Mrs. Berenborg saying, I just want to mention, you had mentioned about violation of sunshine. The only place I've seen that or heard about that was in the newspaper. And so if we're trying to tell everyone, don't believe everything you read in the newspaper. So I just want to clarify, I want to ask any board members if they are, can I ask that? Ask what? If we have any board members that are talking to any other board members about the superintendent's contract, because it was insinuated, perhaps that could be. I mean, we need to clear that up because, go ahead.
Yes, I read about it, but I also was approached.
Okay.
So that made me nervous that as a board, and like I said, I'm part of this team. That's why I wanted to make sure that I had done my homework and investigated it and made sure that we were okay.
Right.
Yeah, I'm okay with answering that question.
Me too. Yeah.
Can we
Absolutely.
answer it?
Yes. Please answer the question.
Would you like us to go in order, or should we just jump in whenever we're ready?
No, simply, but I think that,
It's just yes or no.
oh,
Oh.
yes or
We'll
no?
come back. We'll come back.
To clarify,
Yeah.
is the question, have I at any time ever spoken to another board member about a decision that may come to a vote, or have I ever spoken to a member of the press about something, about a potential vote that I might make? What's the question?
Well,
Sure.
the question.
No, to both.
Right.
I mean, if that's the question, no, of course not, nor would I. And I'm extremely careful, and anybody who has spoken to me, I have specifically said, I will not put either you or me in the position of me telling you something I might do in the future. I won't do it if you're a personal friend, I won't do it if you're a member of the media, and I sure as heck am not gonna risk jail time or fine by talking to another member of this board about something I am legally prohibited from doing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely will not happen, I
That
can
was supposed to be
guarantee
yes
you
or
that.
no.
I know.
Okay, you were told yes or no.
Let's
What was
go,
it?
yes or
let's
no.
go back to Mrs. Rosario
It wasn't
so
clear
it
if the
doesn't
answer
seem like.
was no, I've never done it, or yes, I'm agreeing that I've never done it. So I
Right.
wanted to clarify the question.
Well, I think this is an important question. I know it seems, this is not a lighthearted question because we took an oath, and by law, that is a violation of jail time in addition to paying a fine. And so that's why, even though it might be lightly thrown out there, it's not a light consequence. So, did you want to, I didn't mean to cut you off since Dr. Schiff.
Since I ranted.
I just wanted to say that I believe this concern came about because of an article that was posted in the Vero News. And frankly, half of what was reported in there was untrue. So that's all I wanted to say. And I cannot believe how the media has twisted things completely around. It's sad that we can't have right reporting.
Definitely.
So that's all.
Mrs. Berenborg.
Yes, I learned years ago as a coach to be extremely careful with the media because you can get misquoted very easily. I know they have a tough job, and I know they need to sell papers. So with that being said, no, I did not have a conversation with anyone here about any of this. As a matter of fact, I'm afraid to talk to all of you.
Right.
And not to be unfriendly, but I also would never have a conversation with a reporter about how I intend to vote. As a matter of fact, I was asked that by a different paper, and I said, no, I am not going to have that conversation. I will talk about anything else, but I'm not going to talk about that.
Mrs. Justice.
The answer is no.
Okay. And my answer is absolutely not. I love my family, and I know what the law says. and I've been on the board long enough to be through ethical training. So I don't appreciate the reporting on that or wherever anyone's getting that information. It's very untrue. So I feel like we're getting off topic, but I think it was we needed to clear that up since we had that mentioned.
On that topic, though, I
Yes.
want to clarify something.
Okay.
There is a difference between talking to reporters about things that are germane to the board and the district and talking to reporters about things that are going to come to a vote and acknowledging how we might vote on something that's controversial. Talking to the press is an area of transparency and an area of willingness to share what we're doing in ways that members of the public who don't attend our meetings or don't watch them may want to know about. And we are not prohibited from doing that in any way. Since I've been on the board, I've done that once. I asked the reporter with whom I spoke to please read back to me anything that she was going to say that I said. But I don't think it's wrong for us to necessarily speak to the press and be clear about what we want to say. I think the issue is not do we speak to the press. The question is about what do we speak. And let's be clear about that we do not violate confidence with each other. We do not speak about matters about how we're going to vote on something. That's different than are we ever going to speak to the press. And I just want to, for the record, clarify that.
So I think a wise counsel would be to, if a reporter has a question and you don't know really.
Then decline to answer, which I've done.
Well,
Sorry.
not only that, but, and the reporters that have been around for our community knows that a lot of times that I'll say, can you email me the questions so I can actually put it in writing, and I just don't say something that could possibly cause issues down the road. Sorry about that. But I would like to get back to the topic, and the topic is timeline. The reason that the timeline is being discussed tonight is because Dr. Rendell did give us that notice. So my job as a chairman is to make sure that we're proactive and we're not reactive. And so that's why I had suggested that we have the FSBA come in and just, not only would they come in and talk about timeline, but I can bring them in and we could just bounce questions off of them right now, because I feel like right now I'm sensing that there's a lot of questions that we might have that we could just ask them. Go ahead.
In response to a couple of the things that have been said, Mrs. Zork, I actually agree with you that it was your responsibility to bring this up. That the way we were notified about the attorney and the possible job opportunity, I believe you were being responsible in bringing that up. I tend, frankly, to disagree with how that conversation happened, but not that it happened. Mm-hmm. And I think you were exercising appropriate authority and responsibility as a board chair. I think it's important that given the set of circumstances that we have the conversation and that we have it now. Now, how we go forward is a different question. And to Mrs. Justice's point about, I've forgotten exactly how you said it, but that we weren't prepared for the conversation, and that I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly how you said it.
We were given information. We weren't prepared to have the conversation. It felt like we had somehow been, and I used the word kidnapped, and I think that was just that's a reaction of this feeling of we started heading down this path that we weren't prepared to have the conversation. And I'm willing to have any conversation. I don't have any issue with discussing anything, any possibility, but it needs to be done in a respectful and professional manner. And I don't believe that it was handled in a respectful or professional manner that night.
So to that, this is neither the first nor the last time we're going to have difficult conversations. So if we're not used to it now, we best get used to it, right, frankly. Because it's going to happen whether we like the way it happens or not. And if we're not, like, it's kind of time to pull our pants up. There's a different expression for that, but we're in public and I'm not going to use it. But we're going to have tough conversations, and they're not always going to go the way we think they should or we want. And it is our job as elected officials, as adult women, as responsible people to have those conversations. Also, Mrs. Zork, I would say that if we are to find ourselves in a position where we unexpectedly need an interim superintendent, it is being responsible to find out what that looks like and how that might happen. If you were not here at a time when that happened in the past, I was not, I would say it's responsible to do that, and I don't fault you for doing that either.
Thank you.
That said, all of that, what matters now is frankly not what happened in the past and how it happened. It matters how we're going to go forward. And let's make some decisions. I don't know what time it is. I haven't been looking. But let's have some conversations then about how we're going to go forward, because right now, how we demonstrate our capacity to move forward responsibly, I think is the most important thing.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I was here when it happened. I was an assistant principal when it happened. It was very disruptive, extremely disruptive to the schools. It was one of the reasons I left this district. It snowballed some things that happened throughout the schools, and it caused turmoil. Why do we want to cause turmoil right now? Today was the first day of testing. That's the part I'm worried about the most. I'm worried about the students and the testing. You know, there's, like you said, I do have questions. I do want to know more. If he decides to leave in 30 days, I don't want to be off the hook, but I also don't want to rush to find somebody. The last time it happened, Dr. Teskey was made the temporary assistant superintendent, I believe, interim superintendent. And then I know Dr. Pritchett came in. I don't know if you remember me from back then, but I was here. I just know that it caused lots of turmoil. And I don't want to do that. People are already upset about how they feel one way or the other. They are. And if we're going down this road, let's go down it very cautiously, because I don't want to do that to our schools. I lived through it once, and it was tough. And you may say that it doesn't affect the schools and the business of the schools. It really does. It affects the faculty and how they treat each other. It affects, we're hearing from students now and how they feel about it, and I just don't like the timing.
Mrs. Justice?
I have nothing to add at this time.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Berenberg, I can respect the fact that the timing is very poor. But again, the only reason we're having this conversation is because of the timing of the email that we received. And so just to go back to the fact that this wasn't going to be on this, we should be worrying about how the district's going to be performing and getting ready for graduations. And tomorrow morning I start the Agnes Peebles interviews with the seniors. Those are the type of things that we as a board should be looking at right now. But unfortunately, we've been put in a very bad situation by our superintendent because we did get that email. And therefore, knowing that he is actively seeking employment elsewhere, and we have a contract with him that says he could leave in 30 days, having a conversation about timeline and searches is not premature in my thoughts. It's just being proactive. I do have a question for Suzanne, Mrs. D'Agresta. Is it, I know we've clarified that we're not violating contract with the superintendent by just looking at the search process, or even if we were to post it, if we went to that extreme. But in the district, are we not allowed to post if we know a position's going to be becoming vacant? We can't post for that position? Because I
gonna
wasn't aware of
I'm
that.
going to defer to the Human Resources Department
Okay.
on that. I can't speak to your
Okay.
internal processes or how you work that out.
Okay. So, so again, I need direction. Give me direction of where you want to take this conversation today. What's the next step? My preference would be, let's have FSBA come in and really talk to us and be there and give us guidance as the experts on, not guidance, but if we have questions, because we can't talk to each other. And the only people that we can really reach out to is the FSBA. So I think it would be very wise for us to have them come in and talk with us.
Can I just ask again? I'm going to ask, I think before bringing them in, everything, we need to know whether or not they'd even do a search for this sitting superintendent. And also, why are we just looking at them? If you say there are other groups, shouldn't we invite the other groups in as well?
Like I had said earlier, I'm not familiar with any other groups. I was just looking at who we used in the past. In the past, we had not used any other search firms in the last 3 years, or in the last three searches. But I was looking online, and there are other ones out there, but I don't know anything about them. And that's something that we would have to look at. I'm sure they have a list of other groups besides themselves. I'm not trying to sell FSBA. I just know that they're the professionals that do this for other counties. So I'm not trying to sell FSBA.
In my preliminary and completely not complete research, because it was in the documents that were provided about cost. The cost here is for members, not for non-members. But my understanding is that even as non-members, or if we were to join FSBA, the cost for FSBA to do it is considerably less than an outside headhunter, which is likely to be double that.
Okay.
That's anecdotal evidence. It's not clear from it's completely anecdotal from preliminary and not conclusive research. But that it might cost us as much as 2 or 3 times as more with a headhunter. But we would have to explore that.
Mrs. Berenberg?
Again, I'm worried about cost as well because,
Right.
let's look at our tight little budget we've got here and, here we are looking at spending more money. That concerns me. And I know, before you say anything else, I know that not moving on something can also cost us more money. So believe me, I'm listening to everything. But I just think we need to settle things down.
Can I pass this, Mrs. Berenberg? This was a question that you had earlier, and if you would take one and pass it to the other board members. I had reached out to FSBA and asked them this morning if we were to become members, proactive, starting from April 1st until the end of, June of 2019, that would be $3,750 for the full board. Or if there are board members that would not want to join FSBA and utilize their council during these times, they can opt out of not becoming a member.
But that's just till the end of this year. If we were to have a search that would go into next year, we would have to be members for the next year, starting July 1st of 2019.
Not
which is-
all board members would have to be members.
Correct, but these figures reflect from now until June 30th, 2019, not July 1st, 2019 through June 30th, 2020, when the search may be occurring, and we don't know that yet.
Correct. However, they would make themselves available during the next few months, and if we were members, to be able to approach them and bounce questions off of, whereas right now we really don't have anyone that we can bounce questions off of. from an experienced board member that's neutral.
Can I ask, I don't think we have the budget for this in our budget, so where would we take the money from if we were going to do this? Because I agree with you, I think it's going to go past July 1st if you're looking at this timeline. And if you're looking at this timeline, then we're looking at thousands of dollars here that we could be giving, you know, to our teachers or our CWA employees. I'm concerned about where the money's going to come from.
May I?
Yes.
This may not be the opportune time, or maybe it is because that's where what we're discussing. The Florida Auditor General's report that just came out, I don't know if you all had a chance to read it. I read through some of it, but Dr. Rendell explained to me today essentially what happened with that report, and that's ending fiscal year 2018, is that somehow or another they found essentially, you know, in layman's terms, an extra about $1.5 million that was not scheduled in the right place, and they found it. So that's going to reflect on, in a positive, for our fund balance. Hold on. That's going to reflect positively in our fund balance. It's going to actually raise our fund balance. We don't know where. Dr. Rendell is actually working on a letter that hasn't come to us yet. So that's why I said this probably wasn't the place to talk about it, but where are we going to get the money? It's possible that it might come from there. Now, moving forward into our new budget, I know that the previous boards did not want a budget for the board as a whole, board corporate. But we are much more, we are different. We are a different board than the previous board. We are all interested in training, and, you know, we're working really hard. And Dr. Rendell and I talked about possibly increasing the board budget. That may very well come from this extra 1.5 million or 1.87 million, whatever it is. We don't know. I don't know. He's going to prepare a letter and give to us, which hasn't come out yet. He's working on it, probably as we speak. But putting him on the spot, but maybe, just maybe, and I'm not for becoming a member, but maybe, just maybe, it would come from there.
Just for clarification, the audit report went to all board members, I think it was on Thursday.
That's correct.
So that's public information.
It is.
Okay.
Dr. Rendell, I'm sorry, I don't want to say the wrong thing. Can you speak to that a little bit, what the results of that report?
I think that would be getting off topic.
Okay,
We all received that report. It was
Okay.
in the report. It's public information.
okay,
So you are absolutely correct. It was, the district had misreported about 1.7, I thought it was.
okay.
So I couldn't remember, 1.5 or 1.7. But it's a lot of money
It's a lot of money.
to
So we
find.
could possibly work on negotiations and still whatever. I think that we should bring FSBA in for this preliminary, you know, Q&A session. I don't think it would hurt us at all. We might be able to gather, like I said before, gather some information that, you know, talking amongst ourselves, you know, we'd probably be going around and around in circles because there's a lot of stuff we don't know. But I do know that we need to have these conversations, and I do know that it's important for us to have communication. I think that the turmoil that is being discussed or being brought up may be coming from a place of personal anger that some board members may be feeling or taking it personally. I don't think that that is a professional way to act. I think that we're here to do the business of the board. And by doing the business of the board, we are supposed to be having these discussions. Whether the discussion happened or was brought up at our board meeting, it was brought up during a discussion period. Whether, we're talking now, this is our discussion time to have board discussions. In the future discussion sessions, they are there for discussion. I hear over and over, I want to have this conversation, I want to have this conversation, and then when we have the conversation, I hear, this isn't the right time to have the conversation, or I'm not prepared to have the conversation. I don't know how to make everybody happy all of the time. I just know that at some point, we're going to have to make an executive decision to move forward with the discussions. I'm ready to do that, because I think that we're wasting time just sitting here twiddling our thumbs, going around again in circles.
Dr. Schiff.
I know that the agenda for next Tuesday's board discussion was being completed today. I don't know what anybody put on it. If I can ask if anybody put a conversation about this on it so that we know we're going to talk about it, because I would be happy to cede my time or anything that I put on it to have this conversation, but I don't know if I've missed the deadline for that because of when it has to be noticed. So if it's already on the agenda, I'm happy to cede anything that I was going to talk about to have this conversation. If it's not yet on the agenda, I don't know if we're too late for next Tuesday, but maybe somebody can clarify.
Can we amend our discussion item?
Mrs. Esplin has posted our discussion session as of 5:48 today. And the backup is with all our items that we were going to discuss. If we wanted to amend it and there was consensus, we can amend it for conversation to continue, but what would the conversation be?
What I think would be the conversation, my opinion only, is it is to gain clarity on if we are to have a search, when and how we anticipate that happening and under what conditions. That's probably wordier than it has to be. But we can't just leave this hanging out there, right? We have to come to some consensus about if we want to do this, when and how we anticipate that happening, at which time it may or may not be appropriate, or we may have consensus about bringing in FSBA for a conversation. I don't disagree that it's appropriate to talk with experts about how this process goes. But until we can give those experts some direction about what we're looking at and what consensus we have, I think it is incumbent on us to achieve some consensus as a board about what we want moving forward, to then give direction about what kind of conversation we want to have with FSBA or anybody else.
Can I make a suggestion to that? Dr. Vogel does not live too far away. If I was to reach out to him and ask him if he could come in for 40 minutes in the beginning so that we could give him direction on what type of conversation we would like to have with them, and then they could prepare a conversation and bring it back to us at another date.
I still think we have to get our collective act together first. We have to achieve consensus as a board about what we want to do moving forward. Then we can engage others in helping us do that. But the conversation is not with somebody else to tell us what we want to do moving forward. It's what do we want to do, and then how can we get support from others to assist us in carrying out whatever is that mission.
Okay.
So why can't we do that now? That's what we're here for now.
Because we're not noticed for that right now. We're noticed to have,
We're noticed to talk about the
Timeline
process,
and process.
the timeline and the process. That's our discussion right now.
well, you
We're
got,
here
you
for
tell me.
this now. That's what we're here to do. This is what I'm concerned with, that we keep wasting time. That's what it was noticed to do, to talk about the search and what we want to do. This is the time.
The conversation about the superintendent's contract is a slightly different conversation.
No, I didn't say the contract.
But if we're talking about when a search is going to happen, it's either going to happen June, after the termination of the current contract, after June 30th, and we're going to see the current contract through, or we're going to make a different decision. That's the conversation to have. That's the conversation.
That's what you want to have.
So the conversation we need to have is, are we going to start a search upon termination of, well, a couple things. Are we going to start a search after this contract ends? Are we going to extend this contract? Are we looking at terminating with or without cause? Is the superintendent have any intention of resigning? Those are 5 separate possible things that could happen, right? Some of which are in our control, some of which are not. For the things that are in our control, it's incumbent upon us to have that conversation. There are a few things that are not in our, whether the superintendent chooses to resign or not, that's not necessarily in our control, right? But the other things are. I think that's the conversation we need to have before then deciding when and how a search is going to happen.
So so what I'm hearing, if we, when we have that, well, now is the time to have the conversation because we're here during discussion time about it. You had so many points in there. If we were to begin the discussion about renewing or non-renewing, are we talking about amending his contract to move that date up forward as a result of all of this?
I don't think we have the option to do that. He can resign.
We can amend his contract anytime. We can, by
Can we
consensus.
change the date of his contract?
We
I'm
can
not clear we can do
amend.
that.
I didn't say change, I said we can amend, but well, let's ask Suzanne.
That's what I'm asking her
Oh.
right now. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
I was asking
So
that
sorry.
right
Can't
now.
listen out of both ears at once. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Could you repeat the
I'm
question?
sorry. Mrs. Dr. Schiff and I were talking.
ma'am.
We don't know, is the superintendent's contract, can it be amended to move the renewal date up? Can we amend his contract with regard to his renewal date?
Are you talking?
Extension of the contract?
Okay, the way the contract is
That's what
currently
we're just talking
worded
about?
is,
That's what you're talking about. That wasn't what I was talking
Well,
about.
we were just questioning it.
Go ahead.
I'm not suggesting it, we were just questioning that, were we not?
I thought I knew the answer,
Okay.
but I could be wrong.
the way the contract is worded, it's a not to exceed date, so the board must make a decision by the July 2019 date whether it wishes to take some action with regard to allowing the contract to extend or to stop the contract from extending.
So can that happen any time before July?
Yes, ma'am, but it may not happen after that date, because once that date is upon us and if we've taken no action, then it automatically extends.
So essentially, it could happen tomorrow, and we're not violating the contract.
A duly noticed meeting.
Duly noticed, right. But then that would mean, but then we could do that with or without cause, is that correct?
That has something to do with cause or no cause. Allowing the contract, it's a different section of the contract. There's a provision in the contract that talks about simply the term of the agreement, nothing else, just the term of the agreement. And whether there's a time period for the board to specifically take action, or a deadline, if you will, to allow the contract to extend for another period of years or to stop the contract from extending for another period of years. It has nothing to do with cause or no cause. It's just the term of the agreement.
Okay, so if we were, let's just hypothetically throw something out there. If we, as a board, decided to non-extend the superintendent's contract beyond the 2020 school year, that could be done at any time.
At any time prior to July
July.
31 of 2019.
Okay. And if we wanted to extend his contract beyond 2020, that could happen at any time prior to July.
if you wish to affirmatively do it, you must do so prior to July 31 of 2019. If you take no action by July 31 of 2019, the contract automatically extends for another year. So it would automatically extend through 2021.
So, Madam, thank you, Mrs. DeAgresta. Madam Chair, are you still talking?
I'm not, what do you mean, am I still talking?
I didn't know if I took up your time.
No, so I need to know,
have a
is
question.
that,
There's two totally different things being talked about in this
Okay.
conversation, and I think those need to be distinguished.
exactly. So I,
One is a conversation about, are we extending beyond the 2020 date? We can choose to either extend beyond that date or not. Either way, we're not changing that date. That date is firm. Either by affirmation or not, we say, yes, we'd like the superintendent to continue beyond June 30th, 2020,
Or
or we
not.
say, we are not going to renew the contract beyond. That's a totally different conversation than are we terminating the existing contract. Completely different conversation. And the two ways we can terminate the existing contract are either with or without cause. Those are the options. The third possibility is the superintendent might choose to resign. Those are our options. We can't like change the contract midstream.
Can I?
go ahead.
Not only that, but one is more costly than another.
Correct.
I want to point that out as well. So again, take our time, make a good decision. Let's
Well-
think about everything.
I do see the benefit of if it's the board's will not to extend his contract to beyond June 2020, to give him that information now, because it might be relevant to if he wants to accept an offer or not elsewhere.
Yeah. Again, I'm going to reiterate, I don't think this is the time, and I'm not ready to make that decision right now.
No, and I'm not asking for that
Okay.
right now at all. But there is a question on the table asking about having another discussion on this, so I'm trying to clarify, so I'm not accused of unilaterally putting information together that wasn't asked to be put together. So I'm trying to understand, what type of information do you want me to get together for the next meeting, and when would you like that next meeting to be?
Mrs. Zork, you expressed an idea about having Dr. Bill Vogel come and speak to us. I'm going to just say I'll be very surprised if Dr. Vogel, would like to come and address this school board, considering some of the things that have been discussed today. He's a man of great integrity. We currently have a superintendent who has a contract until 2020. As Dr. Schiff, has pointed out, we have not chosen to terminate the contract with or without cause. The superintendent has not resigned. He has not given notice of leaving, and we have not given him notice in any way. You did ask for the superintendent's resignation at our last meeting. I do not believe there was consensus for the board as a whole to ask for that resignation. Going forward in this manner, I believe, is premature. And as far as gathering information or having FSBA come in, I agree with Dr. Schiff and Mrs. Barenborg that I do believe that we are putting the cart before the horse. I believe this was Mrs. Barenborg's words, in moving forward in this way without any definitive action on behalf of the board and a legal vote to move forward in this way.
Can I just clarify something? I had talked to Andrea Messina, and before Andrea called me back, she watched the entire 2-hour discussion. And Dr. Vogel also reviewed the discussion, and Dr. Vogel also reached out to Dr. Rendell and let him know that I was talking with him. And so Dr. Vogel is more than happy to come and speak with us. He was more than happy to come today, but out of professional courtesy, we wanted to let the board know that They were willing to come and speak to us, and so that's why I waited to bring them in, because I wanted to make sure that I had consensus of the board to bring them in. So they're very well aware of this. And this transitions for districts is it's not uncommon to them. It might be uncommon to us, but it's not to them. They're the professionals, they're the experts on this. So that's why I had reached out to them for additional questions. So, Dr. Schiff.
I think we need to get this resolved. Whether we do it now or we do it at our board discussion next Tuesday, we need to have real clarity on how we're going forward. We can have that conversation. Now we're 6:20. Technically, we have 10 more minutes. We can keep going.
We can't keep going, actually. I do have an obligation. I'm sorry.
If we want to have this conversation, whether or not we want to have it, we need to have it. We need to have it, and we need to have it sooner rather than later. We need to put it to rest. I am sorry about the timing. I think our timing is unfortunate, frankly. However and why ever that happened. That said, we need to have this conversation. We need to get clarity. We need to attach numbers. We were all sent an email about some costs, as Mrs. Barenborg said. If we were to choose to terminate the contract, I'll put it out there, that's about an $80,000 decision. If we go forward to June 2020 and decide not to renew, that does not carry that same price tag. Each of those decisions carries implications for a search and a timeline. And if we decide to extend the contract, that's a completely different conversation. So unless we have clarity on those things, and unity as a board and consensus or a vote, obviously we can't vote at a board discussion, we can only vote at a business meeting. But until we do that, that to me is an important step. I agree with Mrs. Rosario that how all of these things happen are not mutually exclusive. But really, let's just have the conversation. Let's have it. We can't not. We can't not at this point. We've now spent 2 hours today and some amount of time last Tuesday. We need to complete the conversation and then as a board decide who we're going to be moving forward. Who are we going to be as this board, and how are we going to show the district, the community, FSBA, and anybody else who's watching who we are as a board.
Thank you.
So
It's
my
fine.
understanding, you want to have a conversation about the superintendent's contract.
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to have that conversation on Tuesday morning? Or do you
You mean
want,
Tuesday afternoon of the board discussion?
do we want to keep our items of discussion that we have already prepared that agenda for? Or do we want to have this conversation that morning starting at 10 to 12 or 9 to 11:30? Or
I'm open. I'd like to hear from my fellow board members on that as well.
I'm good with it.
Good with what?
I'm good with meeting on Tuesday, today, tomorrow. Anytime you call the meeting, I'm good to meet. And discuss and talk and make decisions. Yeah.
Okay.
So our discussion items for next week, I'm willing to table mine.
Okay.
So if we can keep the time where it is, I'm fine with I'll secede my time, and let's have this conversation that we have to have. I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah, I'll cede my time too. I'm
Okay.
fine with that.
I will too.
I will as well.
Are we going to, and that's fine, we can use that. We have an enormous amount of discussion. Being members of FSBA would probably be very beneficial for this school board, for some comparison about the amount of discussion that we have compared to other districts. If we are going to be discussing the superintendent's contract, I know that Dr. Schiff has expressed before that data is very important to you in decision-making. And I know Mrs. Barenborg has also expressed that. How will we be incorporating data? and school district performance and student performance in that discussion. Madam Chair.
May I?
Go ahead.
If a decision is made without cause, you don't need data.
Thank you, Mrs. Rosario. I just asked the Madam Chairwoman, Mrs. Zork, how we will be incorporating data. We ask our teachers to use data to inform their practices in the classroom. We ask our principals to use data to make decisions on their campus, and it would only be right that we use data in analyzing the performance of our superintendent. So I would just like to know how we plan to incorporate data in the decision-making process of how to move forward with our superintendent and his contract.
The superintendent does have an outline of his goals and how he's going to go about his goals. Go ahead.
I would caution we're getting into a really tricky area right here. If we have a conversation about extension, termination with cause, or termination without cause, termination with cause requires us to demonstrate that the superintendent has in some way failed to meet the obligations of his contract or the directions of the board. Termination without cause doesn't require any of that. We can make the decision because for whatever reason we want, and we don't have to publicly in any way to say that this is based on one or another piece of data. We may want to do that work privately to come to our individual conclusions, but when we voice what it is that is our preference moving forward, we are not required and may or may not want to exercise that work publicly for legal issues, frankly. And then third, if the superintendent decides that he wants to take another course of action, he can do that. But to have this conversation, we will each, as individual board members, come having done all of the work and all of the research and had all of the conversations that we want to have that will go into what we think is important in making that decision moving forward. And I don't know that it requires publicly noticed data to do that. Ms.
I would like
DeGresta,
to- Mrs. DeAgresta, her and I had some conversation about going into details, so I would like her to share.
Oh, you're talking about me. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about Dr. Schiff.
No.
I'm sorry.
What was the look on your face like?
I'm sorry. I
No, you
completely
and I
missed-
had that conversation about legal.
This is really up to the board to define your meeting, the topic of your meeting, or the discussion of your meeting, possibly for next Tuesday during your 12 o'clock meeting, whether it's going to be a review of data, a review of goals, review of accomplishment of those goals, or if it's simply going to be a discussion about whether or not the superintendent's contract will be extended for a period of time. I mean, that's up to the board to decide.
That's a good way of putting it.
What are you going to talk about? That's up to you.
So coining it as superintendent contract encompasses, because I don't know what Mrs. Rosario or Dr. Schiff
Right,
or
absolutely.
well, I think I know what Mrs. Justice is thinking, but Mrs. Berenborg, I don't know what they're thinking. So how can we, I don't want to pinpoint them to that at this moment. I feel like we should just have the conversation about the superintendent contract, and we have the 3 hours to discuss it. Go ahead.
What I think I heard from a few board members as far as the scope of the discussion is what lawyers call the term of an agreement. Another way to say it is the duration of an agreement, the amount of time on an agreement, whether it's a year, 2 years, 10 years, the term of the agreement. So if that's what the board is looking to talk about, then I would suggest that the agenda item would be a discussion of the term of the superintendent's contract. If you also wanted to go into what my lawyer had, to me, is a slightly different discussion, and that is the termination of a contract. In my mind, it's two different things. The length of a contract is one thing. How you may want to terminate it early or extend it beyond its term is another. So I don't want to put a limit on your discussion. I don't know where you're going with it.
And I don't want to put the limit on it either, because I don't know where.
Could you maybe, Suzanne, in light of, Ms. DeGresta?
No, Susanna's fine.
In light of that, could you help us with language that is the broadest possible language to have that conversation? Because none of us knows how that conversation is going to go, frankly.
If you're just looking for something very, very broad, it would just be the employment contract of the superintendent. And then everything is up for discussion.
I think it's important to keep it as broad as possible.
Yeah. I have a question.
And well, never mind.
No, go ahead, Dr. Schiff. What were you going to say?
Two things. For those who are affected by this conversation, which is kind of everybody in the room, and everybody who's watching, I want to both apologize for any distress that may cause you at the moment, and I want to assure everyone that we will, moving forward, be as responsible to the district as possible, as responsible and compassionate and considerate of everybody in the room, in the conversation, and make a decision that best serves the district and the students and the families of this district. And I want it clear that that's our priority. And I also want to ask that the media please be responsible in reporting this conversation, in any conversation moving forward. These are difficult enough conversations to have. They are difficult in the community, they're difficult in this room, and they're difficult with everyone who's affected. And I would really like to ask everybody in the community to please be as cautious and compassionate and as responsible in how they have these conversations in public spaces.
Go ahead.
I have a question for Mrs. DeAgresta. Because our Tuesday discussion session has already been posted, is it,
We can amend it.
we can amend it for that?
But we haven't got confirmation from Mrs. Justice if she will allow us to utilize her two discussion items.
Oh, I'm sorry, you did. I did say that I would be fine to do that.
Okay.
Mrs. Sork, perhaps you didn't hear me. I would normally love to continue this conversation, but I do, in fact, have an obligation with my family. We did have a time certain end of 6:30.
Okay. Well, this is an important conversation.
It is absolutely important, and I am glad that we have come to set some time aside to have this conversation on April 9th. Thank you, Mrs. Sork. I believe we set the time certain end time for you, Dr. Schiff. You said that you had a long day tomorrow, a 12-hour day, and we had set a time. I'm
here.
just
I mean,
being
it's not-
respectful.
Yeah.
Okay, so at this time, where we are today is that it seems that the board wants to actually have a conversation about the employment contract of the superintendent, and we are going to actually dive into that discussion on, what is that date?
April 9th.
April 9th at 12 o'clock. And it's an informal discussion like this is here. So we are going to continue this, and
I'm sorry, what's the difference between an informal or a formal discussion?
We're not
think-
voting.
we're not voting.
But if we're talking about his contract, to make the decisions that we're talking about making, could that happen at that meeting?
No, it will not happen at that meeting. We would, we would never make an action at a discussion session. It would have to be, like I said earlier, under an action item. During a board business meeting, it would have to be properly noticed before we could ever take action like that. But we can decide if we're going to take
That
that
action.
direction and put it on the agenda for for a vote. Okay? All right, so that's where we are today. We're going to expand this conversation until April 9th. Thank you.
Thank you.